And you were a Marine, right?
Well, you weren't ever in the past tense, right? You're
Always
you're always one. Yeah.
you were an active duty Marine for.
I was a skinnier Marine at one time. I was a faster Marine. I was a younger Marine, but yeah, I'm still one.
I would
Just older and fatter.
You've grown and are a Marine forever.
Yes. Yep.
So
for sure.
I think I should do the So, Brian Monheiser, thank you for joining us. You are a man who's done many things over the years, and I think currently, I think you have your own practice, and I think you work with Anthony, right? Anthony Calamito, is that correct? Or are you doing more than that? I don't want to limit you here, but I mean, I first met you when you were doing geospatial and geo-intelligence.
Yeah, when I worked for Boundless back when Red, your younger brother, and I worked together. So
right. So you worked with the crazier side of the Curry family. I think is the.
I think it depends.
He said, "Say what's up" to Brian. I just spoke to him this morning, and he remembered he met you in 2014. I was like, "Hey, tell me about the first time you met Brian." And he said he turned up at some meeting, I think in Florida, with wearing crazy shorts and flip flops or something. And you're like,
no, it's even better than that. So he was a package deal with Ann Johnson. So when Ann Johnson came to be the new CEO of Boundless, she brought Red.
And she went on to Qualys, and she went on to Microsoft, and so on.
Yep. But we met. So we were doing an offsite at some boutique hotel in Miami, and the pool was on the rooftop. And there is Red, who I'm meeting for the very first time, and he is wearing white sweatpants, oversized baggy sweatpants, which is
one of his signature things. Yeah,
sure. And the fact that they were white, he was wearing flip flops. He was wearing slides with socks on, because I do remember that. And then he had on a hat. He had a hat on and some sunglasses. And I thought, who is this Joker? And he turned out to be one of my favorite people on the planet.
Yeah, he's so he had been with Ann and me briefly at RSA, and they hit it off. Red's one of these people who he'll meet you. If he thinks you're a good person, he'll do anything for you. Sure. And he had that kind of relationship with Ann at the time. So, and then Red told me, you got to meet Brian. He's like brother by another mother, and I was like, yeah. And then so the three of us had a chance to work together when we did Cyber Reason Government. Which was the subsidiary that was going to go to market with the U.S. government, which of course we're no longer doing. But we had a chance to actually work together, and it was really great. Yeah,
we did. It was brief, but it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. So thank you for joining us. I've been looking forward to this one because every time I talk to you, we always have fun, and we have a similar philosophy of always do the right thing, always pay it forward, be a good human kind of thing. But I don't think I've had a chance to really explore your early days. And I know, for instance, I knew that you were an active duty Marine. But I don't know. And I think you've sort of come in and out of cybersecurity over the years. It was never the center of what you did, but you've had a chance to touch it many times over the years. So maybe you could tell us a bit about your early career and what made you the amazing person you are today. Not to embarrass you or anything.
I was gonna say amazing is very kind.
The awesome.
It's fun.
Literally the fairy dust.
Yeah, I have an interesting story, and there was a time when I was embarrassed by this story, but now as I've gotten older, I find it kind of humorous. I went to college, like most people do, and I did good in semester number 1, and then in semester number 2, I found the fraternity house, and I found bars, and I found video trivia, and I found all these things that weren't school. And I started really enjoying those. And I got my first report card, the old school style where it was the whole carbon copy thing where you rip the edges off and open it up. And there was an awful lot of zeros in my GPA. I think it started with 1, and I think it ended with 1. And I knew
So this
that
is
my
the
parents.
corruption. This is the corruption of Brian. This is
Yeah,
So how
well,
were
I
you?
mean,
the fall from grace. The
I don't know that I don't know that I was
Hero's journey.
I don't know that I was corrupted. I was doing it to myself. But long story short, I go on academic probation, then suspension. I do this routine for about 3 years. Suspension, probation, or probation, suspension, probation, suspension. I'm duping my parents and sending home fake grades to appease everybody, right? It's still all going good.
Oh my.
Yeah, yeah. Well, long story short, it makes it about 3 years. I get caught.
You know, your
Right?
parents may see this, by the way. I just put it out
Oh,
there.
I don't, well, we're past all that. There was a rough time, right? But I came home at about between year 3 and 4. Nobody was very happy with me, and nobody was super happy to have me staying there. So I went and lived with my Uncle Sam. My Uncle Sam is your Uncle Sam. He's everyone's Uncle Sam. I knew that I needed to go in the military and grow up a whole bunch. I wasn't dumb. I wasn't incapable of being successful. I wasn't ready to do those things yet. And so I joined the Marine Corps.
You need seasoning. Yeah.
Well, and
That resonates with me. Yeah.
When I was picking which branch of service, there was nobody in my family that had been in the Marine Corps. My grandfather was career Air Force. I picked the one that I thought would be the most miserable, that would cause the greatest change in the shortest period of time. And it's the greatest decision. Greatest decision I've ever made, right? So went in, did boot camp. I did all the things I was supposed to. That world fit for me, and it made sense, and it was easy. And with some structure, I did really, really well. While I was in boot camp, so prior to going to boot camp, everyone takes their ASVAB test, right? It's
actually going to be one of my next questions.
Yeah.
Yep. It's basically an aptitude test. What are you capable of doing? Can you barely tie your shoes? Are you really, really good at math?
Can I make a Marines joke there about shoe tying, crayons? Sure,
crayon eating, yeah, the whole 9. And I had scored really high in my ASVAB, and they essentially said, hey, you can have any career field you want. And fortunately, I didn't listen to my parents a lot from 17 to 22. I did listen to my grandfather, and he kept saying, hey, if you go in the military, make sure that you pick a job that's transferable into the civilian world. He's like, there's nothing wrong with being a grunt, but you don't see fire teams of guys walking through with guns. He's like, there's nothing wrong with motor T, but that will be your career. There's nothing wrong with, doing food services. He's like, but find something that's transferable and it really has an upside. And so I knew that would be in the intelligence space. This is obviously all pre 9/11, right? So intelligence has been important to national defense since the beginning of time, but even became more so after September 11th. But in boot camp, I was guaranteed intelligence field, so O2. So as a basic enlisted Marine, you could be a geospatial intelligence analyst, you could be a linguist, you could be there's a third one.
Brian, you broke up a bit. Could you repeat in boot camp after that?
Sure. So in boot camp, a gentleman came up in the middle of formation. They called me out of formation. The guy's got his clipboard. He's like, hey, how do you feel about geospatial intelligence as your career field, as the specific thing you do inside the intelligence field? I didn't know what that was. And so I stood there.
It's not mentioning the name. I barely know what it is. Yeah.
Sure. So what was interesting was my senior drill instructor, a gentleman by the name of Staff Sergeant Patton, said, he'll take it. And so I didn't even pick this career that I've ended up in, right? It was kind of interesting. It was picked for me. But I've always been
you might have gone that route.
Well, no, I was guaranteed intel. So I could have been an all source analyst. I could have been, there's different intelligence disciplines you can do. Cyber, right? You can do imagery intelligence, you can do geospatial, you can do the whole 9. And so I'd always been kind of a spatial thinker. I'd always enjoyed geography, all the parts and pieces that make up the geospatial world. And so
spatial.
Yep. And so following that, I went to school at Fort Belvoir, which is just outside of the Beltway or DC area. Went to school there for about a year. You learn geodetic survey, first half of the course, and then the second half of the course, you learn about, geospatial information systems. all the science behind what you do and how you do it, and what are the actual pieces of software that people have built to help you do your job. Did that for about a year, ended up at Camp Pendleton, California, which was my first duty station. Was there about 6 months when I got an opportunity to go do what's called a MEU, MEU, which is a Marine Expeditionary Unit. It's essentially, think of a group of Marines and sailors being parked in different places around the world so that you're ready in a moment's notice. You've been trained for every possible scenario you can think of. We joke that it's America's 911 force. We're just sitting out in the water, floating around the world, waiting for an embassy to call to have an evacuation, waiting for there to be floods or volcanoes or something that happens where they need humanitarian assistance. So you spend 6 months cruising around the Western Pacific doing that. And I spent 6 months on the USS Boxer, came home on the September 11th. I was laying on the floor of the Boxer waiting to take flights off. And we watched the World Trade Center get hit. Spent the next 9 months doing avenues of approach for Iraq. We knew where we were going. We knew we were going to send, elements of our DoD there. So we spent, 9 months looking at, imagery and looking at vertical obstructions and anything that would impact someone's route from drop-off point to desired target. And then because of September 11th, because of having an intel background, because of having a security clearance, it was not hard to find a job. And so I had all kinds of job opportunities waiting for me. And I took one of those at my 4-year mark. And that took me to be an instructor at the college at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. So the same schoolhouse I went through as a Marine, I came back through and was a civilian instructor, not teaching military, but teaching other civilians. And so that was kind of what got me out of the Marine Corps and into this geospatial world. Took me from San Diego to St. Louis, which is where I live just outside of St. Louis now. I did that because my entire family was in Central Arkansas. So I wanted to be in close proximity to my mother, my grandmother. I don't know, want me to help move a couch, hang some Christmas lights, show up and eat food, whatever. And I've been here now 22 years.
You can call in the Marine Expeditionary Unit to help move that couch, basically.
Right. So I've been here since August of 2002. I worked in the NGA college as an instructor. I went and worked on the systems engineering and solution engineering side of things, not because I was qualified, but because I wanted to learn, why did we build what we build and deploy what we deploy, and how do we do it, and how do we determine requirements. And so I wanted to do that piece, and so that was a bit of a stretch. And then that led into a sales career. I was up giving a presentation about a program of record that we had been working on and a deployment of software and hardware. And in the process of doing that, there was a gentleman by the name of Mark Schultz who ran the intelligence business practice for Esri, which is the world leader in geospatial technology and has been for many, many years. Got up and said, "Hey man, have you ever sold?" I'm like, "I'm not a sales guy. I'm a practitioner, right? And so he was like, "No, you'll be able to figure it out." And so that then converted my career of being a practitioner, right, being a hands-on guy, to all of a sudden talking to people about what are you doing, why are you doing it, what do you need, why do you have it, what do you think you need. And so I've I ended up in a sales career, but I've always kind of treated it as like a practitioner. I want to be someone's friend. I want to be helpful. I want to see what they're doing, why they're doing it, how they're doing it. And then maybe I'll recommend some things to you. And if those things are something that I happen to sell, awesome. If they're not, let me connect you with somebody who does. And so that's what my career has turned into.
Well, Brian, I'm gonna, this is not meant as flattery, it's meant as observation. You've always had this combination. So I have a friend who talks about, quote, weaponized extroverts, and I find that it's too small a category because you genuinely care about your customers, and I've seen you say this isn't right for you, and in some cases, and you have a bond with your customers. But you have a. Not only do you have a charisma, not only do you understand the pain of the customer, and you care about the outcomes and stay with them, you also have no tolerance really for people that just dodge around and they're just trying to like plant the product, get the money and leave. Like you have zero tolerance for that. And as a result, your customers sort of know it. And, you gave, I've heard you give advice. I've heard you talk, because we did this with cyber reason government. You're very much about, don't bury the headline, I've heard you say, right? Like, bring that to the fore and talk about the so what, right? Like, the so what is not so what for the seller. It's what is the big deal for the person buying? And if you don't have a big deal, don't bring it. And frankly, you've built an excellent network through trust and this relationship with the customer. And you can be very self-effacing at times, and funny. And I think people enjoy your company, but at the end, it's that they trust you and they know you're going to solve their pain for them. And that is a natural thing you have. Yes, I think you've rationalized it, you've trained it, but I think you've probably had that all along.
It's funny. I appreciate those kind words. I had a moment happen to me when I was on my deployment where we had put together products for an exercise. And it was a SEAL team that was going to go out and do an exercise. And they get on helicopters and they fly somewhere. And I provided the HLZs, and they get off on those HLZs and they have to make it to their target, and they have to make it to that thing undetected. And I provided all of that, right? That was my job. And when they went out and came back, he said, "Hey man, I want to thank you for doing what you do, because you're allowing me to be a husband another day, a father another day, a son another day, and a brother another day." And I realized the value of the work that I did. If I wasn't doing it for those guys or gals, right, then it didn't matter. And I think that was kind of the one moment in my life where I realized, oh, this is about the mission, right? Nothing else matters, right? Maybe I want to sell the most stuff. Maybe I want to get my things in there. Maybe I want to be, important for a moment. But that's that definitely takes a back seat, because you have those moments where you go, oh, it's about something way bigger than me. And I've happened to live in a career field where it is about service, right? You're serving the country, you're serving the nation, serving the war fighters, serving the people who go out and do the hard jobs. And so you got to make sure you do a good job. And so it doesn't matter what narrative you're trying to push or what your motives are. They have to be the right ones. And I've learned in doing that, people always come back around, and you get it tenfold, right? Or you get invited into meetings you probably shouldn't even be in, because they're like, man, he was really a straight shooter, was a good dude. Let's just bring him in. And it just builds relationships, right? Which I think at the end of the day, those things do turn into revenue generating opportunities, if that's the thing that you're kind of judged by based on the role that you hold.
So I always felt a kinship around that, because I'm the same way with cyber, right? I both am a practitioner, and I talk to other practitioners. And if somebody calls me and says, I have a problem, I don't care. I drop everything for them. I have the sense you do too. But the reason they want you in the room isn't just because of the things you sell. It's because you have a habit of mind that doesn't just cut to what's the value of the thing I'm selling. It's what's the core problem here. And how do I solve that? Whether or not it's in my toolkit. If it is, I'm bringing it. And if it isn't, I'm going to help you see it. And they want you in the room for that. Not because you're the most technical person in the room, but because of how you think about things. And you probably have friends like that, right? Jacob, does this resonate with you in your experience with Brian? Because you had a chance to spend a couple of years there. And I've been flattering Brian here. I'm pulling it out of him. Was that your sense too, or did you think he was a terrible person, basically?
Yeah, I thought he was the worst. No, I'm actually trying to work with Brian again. If it makes sense for us, we were talking the other week. We're still trying to figure out if it makes sense for us to do anything again together. But yeah, I wouldn't come back and ask Brian to help if I didn't think that he was a good person. I think at the end of the day, and I try to tell my teams this, and the people that either I manage or coach or whatever it is, at the end of the day, that almost no job really matters. It's the people that do. Everything else, companies disappear, structures disappear, even governments disappear, right? When things change over time, but the thing that's always left at the end is the people and the experience you had with the people. Brian, I think, is one of those people that you walk away from these experiences and you're like, yeah, Brian was a great person. You mentioned mission, though, which I think something for the audience that might be really interesting is a lot of people probably don't understand the intelligence part of the world very well that are cyber people. Cyber people think of intelligence as IP addresses and domains and things like that, but intelligence is so much greater. right, and malware, or APT dash something, like that's intelligence to cyber people. But intelligence is such a broad spectrum, as you mentioned. I think it'd be awesome for you to share a little bit about what geospace does, a little bit more about what the missions
Intel
you've had.
and your take on it.
Yeah, and how does it actually impact people? As you mentioned, it impacts people positively, but I don't think people probably understand the full process of what it is and what does it mean to be a geospatial intelligence person or officer or whatever it is.
Oh, and maybe secondarily, when and how did cyber touch it if it did? Because at some points that grew, I think, in your career. But yeah, maybe start with what is spatial intelligence and what is intelligence? Yeah.
So I think the really cool thing, right, is that every single, like, if you took the words intelligence community, right, the thing that people think of, they go, oh, Jason Bourne, or the thing I saw on TV, or yeah. There all of those things do exist, and I think anybody that works in that space would tell you it's certainly made to look more glamorous or cooler or different or even more sneaky than it really is, and it's not all those things. But you have to give people a reason to be interested in it. But at the end of the day,
it's not all martinis, basically, and motorcycles.
No, it's none of that.
We can just end now. That's what I was here for.
So. Sorry, Jacob. You're gonna have to find a new career path.
Yeah, that ship has sailed. But I think at the end of the day, we all want to get some derivative out of information, right? You want to know something about in your personal life, right? Who are my neighbors, and are they good people, and do they have kids, and where do they work? I mean, there's things you want to know about people and things and places because you're trying to kind of complete a story and at least inform yourself, right? We do the same thing in the intelligence community, right? We need to protect our country. We need to protect our assets. We need to protect our military secrets and tradecraft and all those other things. And in order to do that, right, we have put people in organizations and disciplines in place to do that, right? And so, like I was talking about, there are a bunch of different people that fall in those disciplines. There's your human intelligence, there's your cyber intelligence, there's your geospatial intelligence, right? There's all these different things. And it's just kind of your flavor of the job, right? And you kind of have to put all of them together to tell a story. And so, that's kind of been my career. On the geospatial side, the easiest way to say it was explaining the battlefield, right? Like, I go back to that, to the SEAL team example. I had data and I had software that, when I used it correctly and in the right order, would help me find helicopter landing zones, right? I needed to know the soil type. I needed to know vertical obstructions. I needed to know vegetation. I needed to know slope. Right? There was all these different things that I had to know, because you can't just fly a helicopter wherever and land it wherever, right? All those other factors would come in. And so you had to take that data and you basically had to say, hey, show me everywhere in this region that doesn't have vertical obstructions and vegetation and poor slope and bad soil. And so that's how it would come up with those, right? And I would give, a commander some choices. Hey, sir, ma'am, here's what you're going to go do. Here's why you would go do it. Here's the pros and cons of each of these. And it was all the way down from the guy who lands, and then he's got to get to the target. Well, you got to go to the target without being detected. So how do you do that? You got to know, where line of sight is, right? From the target back to how do I navigate my way there, staying out of the line of sight? How do I avoid choke points, right? I can't get myself down in a valley where all of a sudden I'm stuck and there's no way out if I get ambushed. And so those are the types of things that we did in the geospatial intelligence world. But I think one of the things that's been really cool, and this plays into your guys' world too, I think there's two intelligence disciplines that cross-cut everything. One's geospatial, because everything has a place on the earth at a point in time. And I think the other one's cyber, right? Cyber cross-cuts everything. And I think there's certain specific things you can do with either one of those, but then they're all, like, you could peel them apart and put lipstick on them and change them into a different complete configurations, and people would see themselves using it. Geospatial and cyber both have elevated so much because technology has, right? When I got into geospatial, you had to have a Linux-based machine. You were basically hammering out, command line prompts to build the things that you're going to go build. Well, over time, things become GUI driven. Over time, you get things like Google Earth. Over time, we get things like smartphones. Everyone has the globe in their pocket now, right? Like you just open it up and it takes you wherever you want to go and tells you whatever you want to know and shows you pictures of things where you're going to go so you can see before you go. Those are all of the things that we've done in the geospatial intelligence world. They're just now kind of at your fingertips. And my business partner Anthony Calamito, who you guys know, he says geography is ordinary now because of that innovation, right? And we just, nobody looks at a paper map anymore. Nobody gets the random McNally Atlas. Nobody does. I mean, even MapQuest, right? Where you actually used to have to read it so that you could then figure out to turn where. Now your car you just follow the blue line, right? And so I think, right, in the geospatial intelligence world, I always joke that geospatial is not geospatial. We do you go to Walmart, they use geospatial intelligence for routing of their trucks, right? We've got things that need to get there in this amount of time. How do we route those things? That's a geospatial problem. You have, one of my favorite examples where I live is we have the Metropolitan Sewer District. They are doing water runoff and all these other things that have a geospatial tie to them to help dictate how the bills change, right? So all of those things are involved. Every single thing that we have now has a geospatial element to it. And if I'm not mistaken, I think they said the geospatial intelligence market will be somewhere in the high $120 billion number by 2027, 28. So, but that's because it's in everything.
That's reaching cyber. So back in 2003, I brought to market a product that was way too early. It was called eTrust 2020, and it was part of Computer Associates. And we were talking about the convergence of physical and digital. And my brother, I think, when he was working with you, was big on this subject. In fact, recently, like 4 years ago, he tried to coin the term cyber and physical sci-fi. It still hasn't really taken off in that way, but the layers that get put on. So where's the human intelligence on top of that geospatial coordinates and time and space? The security of that, where is the cyber asset physically located that can then be targeted perhaps with a human or an asset like a missile, for instance, in a war zone, right? All of this is converged. Now, when did that happen for you? When did geospatial start to converge with human and with cyber or ELINT? And to what degree? I mean, you might have been there when you began, but did it in fact get more integrated, or is that just a perception I have looking, from my cyber side?
No, you're spot on, right? We would work in teams, right, where you would have your imagery guys, you'd have your geospatial guys, you have your cyber guys, you have your counterintelligence or human guys, you have your signals intelligence guys, right? Everybody was their own specialty, and we worked together as a team in order to do whatever we needed to do, right? But over time, those things, again, I think it's innovation. It's technology has taken us so far. All of those things become so ordinary. They become so part of one another. They're out of the box solutions now, right? Things just happen, and you have different security measures that have been included in everything that's physically handed to you, right? Like I think it just became, again, to Anthony's point, it became so ordinary. I don't remember ever having like that aha moment. What I did realize though was there was a time where I felt like, as a geospatial practitioner, I felt like we were kind of the secret society of the skulls. There's not many geographers, right? Geography is not taught in schools anymore. I mean, you might find it, but in general, it's fused into a social studies class, right? They slap a couple of maps around and call that geography, or something in the physical sciences.
Right.
But geography itself was a scorned discipline for a long time because it had racist connotations, right? For a while, it was like, hey, we're looking at human populations who live in colder or warmer areas. And for a while, it was a no-go. It was only about geology, really, and about political boundaries. Right. So that kind of had to do with it. But yeah, please continue. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, so the fact that these things, don't exist, I always felt like we were this weird kind of group of people where people didn't understand us, but everybody had to have us, right? Everybody needed us to help them do their job, but we kind of hid in the background. And again, Google Earth, smartphones, the whole nine, I think it's just become so ordinary to people. It's funny. I don't think people realize how much goes into the data that's on their phone. People just open their phone and go, well, everything's everywhere. It's like, no. It's not like, that's not magic. There's somebody who is well versed in data management. There's someone who's well versed in data science. There's all these things that go into making that thing do what it does. It's not magic. And I, because it happened so fast and everybody had access to so much information, physical location data, the whole nine, I still don't think people really grasp the science that goes behind it.
It's something that
I have a sense that. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jacob.
I was gonna say, it's something that drives me slightly insane with Americans and their obsession. So this could go to the obsession of like warfighters. What are the things that there's an entire demographic, and we're a unique country almost in this, that just loves the war part of, like, the physical part of running around with a gun, right? And there's this huge fascination with it in our culture in America. And what so many people don't realize is all of these components that you just talked about, that's really behind what they see. So you see something in a movie of a guy doing some mission, and they see the guy go into a room and they go, here's your mission. And then he walks out and does the mission. But there's been months, maybe even years in some cases, where there's been geospatial, human intelligence, cyber intelligence, maybe even some sort of offensive cyber campaign in many cases, which people don't talk about, that precedes a special operations these days. And no one knows about all these logistics and all these things and all the people, hundreds often, that go to a single operation that made a warfighter successful.
Well, think about refugee relief. Think about customs and immigration. Think about FEMA when there's a disaster that happens. Think about climate change and rising sea levels or heat waves. All this stuff is crucial. If you're planning a city and you're expecting an inundation of refugees, where do you put them? Right?
Like we have that problem right now.
I mean, the concentration camp came about originally because people put them on the wrong side of the mountain in the Boer War. Like, if you don't have the geospatial information, you're not going to be able to keep the humans alive.
Yeah, I don't know where I was going with this point really, but I think the systems that lead to things, and I guess that's why I do anything I've ever done career-wise, the systems that build to a larger thing is what's really interesting to me. It's all these components that build up to something. And geospatial is such a foundational component that builds, as you were saying, even modern water delivery, that people just don't know what the systems is that leads to what they get and what they do. And I use the warfighter as an example because it's such an obsession in America, but there would be no modern warfighter without geospatial. There would be no modern warfighter without cyber intelligence. There would be. And people don't know that. They think they can pick up a gun and go run down the street and they're the next James Bond.
Brian, did you ever do you have a sense, because you know sometimes when we manage out the things that cause failures, we take for granted those failures don't happen. So like imagine a helicopter going to a landing zone, and it could, the latency and how you fly the thing, gusts coming down the valley, or that you were talking about vertical obstacles and soil and those sorts of things. If that information wasn't there, how many mission failures would there be because of it that you've removed from the table, that people now take for granted? So I think I don't know what geospatial intelligence was like in World War II or Korea, for instance, or Vietnam, but is there a sense of how many lives were saved, how many missions went better, both civilian and military, because of geospatial? And does it continue is the Pareto getting that much better?
I'm sure there's countless, right? Just like with anything, right? Medicine starts to save lives over periods of time. People don't die from diseases that can be resolved. So I'm sure that it's definitely improved over time. I don't know that that's ever been documented anywhere or that I ever saw that, but at the end of the day, you can see real live results when you go UPS. There's another geospatial problem. I have to go deliver packages. If I can deliver all of my packages in 5 hours versus 8 by the route that I picked, the number of turns that I make, the traffic I deal with, the time of day, that is, it's not, you're not saving lives, but to somebody, that's a life-saving, evolution. Oh my God, we do more every day than we ever did before. It's costing less money. We're being more effective. Our customers are happier. Again, it's not saving a life, but people think of those things.
Organs. If you're have an organ delivery service and it has to be the right temperature and fast, right? Optimal pathing. Right. Hey, sorry, the kidneys got a bit warm.
Right. Yeah. So it's become part of everyone's everyday life, but to Jacob's point, people don't realize all the hard work that goes into making that stuff work. People don't realize that when you're funneling data into any system, authoritative data matters. Stuff that's highly accurate matters. You can't just put whatever in. It's been funny, right? You know, the U.S. federal government, and more specifically, you know, the DoD and intelligence community crowdsource data. There's no way we were ever using that. Why? Because it didn't come from an authoritative source. And how did you know that it had all the right metadata? And how did you know that it was accurate? And well, you don't. However, there is some stuff out there that's faster and more timely and more accurate and more complete that was done by somebody who's not anointed, right? And you start to go, that's really good data. But again, people have to realize that in order to make these systems work, there's a whole lot of quality control that has to happen for these things to work too, or else your map doesn't take you to the right place. It doesn't tell you that stores are open on the right hours. It doesn't tell you who rated drinks the highest at a bar, right? Like if someone didn't manage that data, it wouldn't show up on your little thing to tell you, oh, go to this bar that's 3 blocks away, got the best drinks, stay open till 2. Well, you only know that because somebody made sure that data was residing in a database somewhere that then fed that thing you're looking at.
And I want to thank you, by the way, because I've heard stories that you have contributed many, many stars in reviews for good drinking holes and places all across the country. I've heard about that. So yeah, thank you for your service, by the way. On that.
That is my community service.
Speaking.
Yeah, go ahead.
Speaking of which, I was going to transfer and ask Brian a little more about what he does when he's not thinking about geo.
I was just thinking that exact same thing. So when you're not doing the geospatial thing and in and out of cyber and so on, what is Brian's what is his DeStressor enjoyment, that kind of thing?
Well, it's funny, right? It's funny you asked this question because this was my hardest year for this. For the last 16 years, when I wasn't working, my life revolved around my child. Right? I have a junior. I have a junior in high school. Yep, Grant.
Who's a pilot? Was it 16?
He did his first solo. He got his student pilot license at 16, and you can get your private pilot at 17. So he soloed a car and a plane on the very same day. On May 9th.
You're not helping with his not James Bond world, by the way. So, you know, like I have this vision of him like parking the car, running across the runway, getting in the plane. And,
you're gonna send him into human.
He's awesome.
Yeah, less sexy than that was the story, but it was really weird because on the day his birthday fell on a Monday, so the DMV was closed, which was a little frustrating. But the next day when he got his driver's license, he pulled away, and I was like, oh, he's going to need me for something. And I kind of sat around for an hour, and I sat around for a day, and I sat around for a week. And he comes back and forth all the time, but he doesn't need me like that anymore. And so it's been an interesting summer because I've been dealing with the whole, I guess I can go do whatever. I guess I can go play more golf. I guess I could. So the de-stressor thing, or what I do when I'm not doing work, I'm still trying to figure that out because that's a new frontier for me as of this past May.
So you're bugging Anthony more, is what you're saying, and you're doing.
Well, he's got it. He's got
as a result. Has it spiked? Is it?
No. So we'll see. I don't know. I enjoy playing golf. I'm involved in a number of other non-for-profits, and I sit on boards of some other things that I donate my time to, and I'm a big believer in. I know those things are voluntary. And they're, not paid, but I still try to make sure that when I'm doing those things, I'm giving my best effort. And so I spend time doing that kind of stuff too.
I think that's such an interesting call out there that I saw a post the other day. It was probably from someone that was slightly ill-informed about how people sit on boards and make all this money by just sitting on boards and doing nothing else. And I don't think a lot of people realize that a lot of board members that sit on and eat both commercial for-profit businesses and non-for-profit businesses, they don't get anything for it. It's purely out of their enjoyment for the subject matter, enjoyment for the people. Sometimes you do get shares. I will say that if you're on a commercial, sometimes what you get is a load of shares, so you're invested to see it successful. But it's nice to hear someone say, I do this because I want to. I do it because I can, and I want to contribute to the mission. I don't think enough people understand that.
It's interesting because I think there are people do this, but I limit myself to only being on 3 boards. I'm not paid for any of them. In my life, I've only been paid for one, and it was like a minimal. It was a publicly traded company in Finland, of all places, and there was a law about you had to pay something, and so it was like a small stipend. But I'm on 2 not-for-profits right now, and I'm on the board of a startup because my dad was involved in it. No pay for that either. I do it because I believe in the companies and the people behind them. What about you? What about you, Brian? Are you making it filthy rich on boards, or
No, those things don't pay. Those things don't pay a nickel. I think what they do pay you in is that you get a lot of fulfillment. So I don't just join a board to join a board, right? I mean, if you're one of these people that likes the Humane Society, if you're one of these people, that likes this, that, or the other, right? You find things that create an emotional response for you, right? You go, oh, I like that, or I like the group of people that are working on it, or I like the thing that they're working towards. And so, I get involved in things that create that emotional response for me. So once I start doing it, the paycheck is, I feel accomplishment, right? I feel satisfaction. I love helping other people, right? I want to see everybody win, right? So when everyone else is winning, if there's maybe just a little smidge of something I got between my ears that's helpful to the group, I like sharing that stuff too. So you don't do it for the money, but you also, as you start to get older, you realize, I have to pick and choose how far I can stretch myself, because you can't do that either. So, and when you're on boards, people expect a lot from you, right? It's not, it's volunteer, but it's like, hey, we got to get stuff done too. So
it's not, this stuff's not easy. You can't just rest on your laurels. And what I found is the one that I had that paid, I actually didn't have to do as much as for the ones that most of the ones that I do that don't.
Yep.
Especially the charity ones. Well, let's say not for profit, because they're not all charities, right? So, but over time, those ones are the ones that you do out of either a labor of love or because the people you're working with, those sorts of things or what have you. But the other thing that will help is networking. It does. And the cause that you're working on, if you really believe in it. So most of mine are cyber causes, one at the federal level, one at the Massachusetts state level, but you must have been involved in some of Grant's community activities over the years. Parent organizations. He was Civil Air Patrol, right?
Still is. He will pin on Cadet Captain next week, and then that leaves him with 3 ranks to make it through. You end that at Cadet Colonel, and so he's on track to do that about halfway through his senior year. And I don't remember the numbers. I'm sure I'm making this up a little bit, but I believe that only 1% of Civil Air Patrol cadets ever achieve the rank of Cadet Colonel. So he's got his eyes set on it. It was interesting, right? He got involved in that so he could fly, but you got to be certain ages for that to happen. So we didn't do a very good job reading the small print on that. But I was really interested how much he enjoyed the emergency services aspect of it, which they partner with FEMA. They do all post-disaster response. When we have floods or hurricanes or even the volcanoes in Hawaii, they slap these cameras on these Civil Air Patrol planes, and they go up and they fly, imagery for post-disaster, and then they're taking that stuff down and looking at pre and post-disaster, comparing the two, so that they can send money or send resources, send whatever to the most affected areas. And so Grant's
he's in geospatial.
It's another tie back.
Yeah, it is. It's funny. There's a gentleman named Scott Kaplan, and he has stood up an entire what's called CAP GIS. And so there's a whole program, and there are actually kids, right? It's 12 to 19, 12 to 20 that you can be in Civil Air Patrol. There are kids who are sitting down at their homes on a PC, opening up a platform that's been provided by Esri. And they're literally doing side-by-side comparisons of pre- and post-disaster. And based off of some criteria, they're literally doing all of the damage assessments from their living room. And they're getting entire areas done in 2 days now, which is really, really, it's like unheard of. So, and the real big win for that is FEMA knows where they can already start deploying resources, right? Where do we send checks? Where do we send whatever? Because if someone's house has been completely destroyed, well, we're going to know that in 24 to 48 hours because of the work that Civil Air Patrol is doing. So it's a great organization.
This is the same sort of thing that we do with spectral analysis for finding exoplanets. We've done it with analyzing alien signals, those sorts of things. We don't do it in cyber, by the way. we have this signal to noise problem, and we
Well,
could.
everyone's so afraid of what happens if they share their information.
We're worried about poisoning and bad guys getting in there and being like, "Ooh, just hide this one," But it's amazing when you can tap into a community effort, and distributed processing with humans is super cool.
Can I go to quickly? I wonder if you've heard of this, Brian. So there's a game that's all the rage on TikTok and YouTube and called GeoGuesser. Speaking of,
you try to figure out where it is. You sent me one.
Yeah, it's so fun. You should. And the people that are good, look up the people that are good at it. There's the first ever, I think, this year, global tournament for it. So it drops you in the middle of nowhere on Google Maps. And then based on what you can see from where it's dropped you in Google Maps, the 360 view that you get, you have to guess your location. And the closer that you get to your location, the more points you get. So you get within a mile, you get 5,000 points. You get, 1,000 miles away, you get 150 points. And there's these guys that have spent time studying, and there's a couple websites you can go to study the information, and they can get it right within a tenth of a second or a second down to at least the country that they're in, if not sometimes the region of the country they're in a tenth of a second.
Well, many of them get it to the intersection, not that fast, but they'll take a minute or two, and they're like, oh, it's this Walmart in this town and like this intersection. And so they just give you like this picture, and they see enough clues and the shadows and what's in the background, and off you go. There's a container somewhere and that sort of thing.
One of the things that caught me was they learned the different shadow patterns of the map cars that did the mapping. So they know that if you see a certain shadow pattern, that must mean it was taken in 2003, and they only use that type of car in Botswana. And so that means I must be in Botswana because this type of car wasn't used anywhere else in the world. It's really, really interesting. I think you'd enjoy it, Brian, if you saw some of
I pulled that up on my phone, so I'll check it out. But it's funny, right? As we're talking about the evolution of tech, there's AI that'll do that for you now too, right? Anthony and I have a buddy of ours, a guy named Leon Worthen, who works at a company called Deja Vu AI. You literally can go take 0.05% of an image, and it will tell you the origin of that image, right? So you don't even have to figure out where you are anymore. Go run something through some supercomputer and have it pop out and go, oh, that's over here, that's over there. I was at a conference last week called Geo-Resolution. They do it at St. Louis. It's a joint effort between St. Louis University and the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. And there was a woman who was getting up, and she was talking about human trafficking. She was more interested in young children that are being human trafficked for sex-related stuff. They're starting to use AI to look at images of stuff that are showing up on the internet. Is that a red roof hotel? Is that because hotels start to now, redo all their hotels and they look the same. And so can you do, pattern recognition or pattern matching, right, from images using AI to then help you narrow down? Because some of these organizations, for sure you can.
Some wall paint, yeah, or the equivalent of, right?
Sure.
They used to go. 15 years ago, the CISO for Ford was telling me that they could tell with a photograph of the road where you were on any road in America. This was 15 years ago. They said, we don't need GPS. I was like, wow. That at the time, right?
Sure. Yeah, but for stuff like that, could you imagine if those advances in technology can help save a kid faster? That's you're talking real world scary stuff with people who can't defend themselves and need people to help them. So if we can use tech to narrow that down faster, I think that's awesome.
Brian might need saving.
Yeah.
Did we freeze?
We've lost him.
I think Brian, you broke up.
I'm back. Sorry.
It's okay. We figured out where you were.
I didn't move far. I just froze.
So to what degree, I just have to ask on the cyber front again, to what degree is cyber now part of what you do? Is it something, I think I've mentioned you to companies, especially when they have to suddenly work with the US government because you really understand that very well, especially cyber companies. I usually say, hey, you got to talk to Brian. Is cyber now as big a part of your business as geospatial, or is it still a side? Yeah, I use some, or is it layered into what you do? Is it inseparable?
I think it's some of side and some of layered, right? It's interesting, right? One of the things that we're trying to do is everybody wants to play in this geospatial space, if not for any other reason than they can see the opportunity for financial gain, right? Is the things I can go do. Cyber is something you cannot map to save your soul. Things move, things aren't where they think they are, things tell you they're here and they're not really. People are on the move. So it's so hard that it's interesting. There's a lot of activities going on. Like, how do you map all of your cyber resources? Like, physically map them. Where are they? Who has them? When do they move? What do I have? And that's really, really hard. And so you can see a lot of people that are kind of starting to come out of the woodworks and apply geospatial principles to other industries, and cyber being one of those. Again, they're the only two, in my opinion. I might be wrong, but they're the only two that cross-cut everything, right? And I think that they're heavily connected, right? Because cyber cares about space and time as well, and so does geospatial.
And if we could solve the space and time problem in cyber, some of the anonymity would be lifted, which is, it's that cloak, it's that veil that makes people get away with things and try things they wouldn't otherwise do.
Yep.
It's still the part of international intrigue and conflict, in the dime diplomacy, information warfare, military and economic. It's the part that you can still have plausible deniability. Oh yeah, I wasn't there. Oh, were you? So if we can lift that veil somehow, if there are tricks in your toolkit, then that gets interesting.
Right.
To me, and maybe my opinion is a little unjust, intelligence in cyber has very few practical roles, unless you can tie back to typically a location. But to a...
You mean like attribution isn't really worth it? Yeah.
Attribution... So let's say before the MITRE ATT&CK framework, and before we could say, here's clearly the tactics and techniques associated with a certain group of threat actors, clearly articulated. People would argue, well, we could do it before the MITRE ATT&CK. Well, I didn't see it, so then it's not true. No, I'm kidding. But MITRE ATT&CK made it easier to do that. And so if you can map a threat, or maybe even predict a threat is coming from a certain group of people, you can then say these are the typical tactics and techniques, and use that to ensure your defenses are solid against it. Or in the middle of a cyber attack, you actually can use it to say this might be a logical next step they take. So let's look at making sure that we're protected against that, or let's look there for our next part of our investigation. But it's only meaningful if you can typically tie back to a geo, because typically that's when it's at the level that it matters, is usually nation state operations. And that's how we identify it, is by geography, right? It is a threat actor group from X region. And that's when I think...
so much easier in cyber. Yeah.
What's that?
False flags are so much easier to pretend to be through someone else.
Right. And then it's again, and that makes intelligence useless then. If you can just say we look like someone else, and you spend all of your energy as your team focused on those methodologies and those tactics, techniques, and procedures. And so while you're over here focusing on that, they're over here doing something else.
Well, Jacob, I think it's useless for the most part, because it's super expensive to go get to the level of precision. You can say, hey, the latency means in this instance that it really probably is, say, Russia or North Korea.
Right.
And it could be somebody pretending to be them, but the cost to do that operation is probably not worth it. All that is a useless thing when what you're really trying to do is just stop the attack and kick them out.
Right. Attribution doesn't matter most of the time.
Right.
Unless, again, you're
just like what Brian was saying, where geography has become normal, I think was what Anthony called it. Where, look, I remember
he says it's become ordinary.
Yeah, well, geography has become ordinary. Where I used to have a stack of maps in my car, and I would stop to get the local one and put it on the dash or on the hood of the car, and I would look and be like, okay, I got to look for this street. And then there was the TomTom that actually you paid money for, or the Garmin that was sat on your dash, and you had to plug it in. And now it's just in your phone. It's just everywhere, and it's just built into the car. Even I don't know if you guys remember this. TomTom and Garmin used to be worth a lot of money as companies for their GPS, right?
Yep.
And I think Jake, we might get to a point a decade from now, 15 years from now, where the cost to get that intel with an integration with geospatial might make it worthwhile. But by the way, Brian, you've probably heard me even say this, or Jacob say this. attribution is something we just don't care about in cyber because it's not worth the effort for the return.
I would argue
Right.
you and I say we don't care about it in cyber, but how much energy and time is that all people do in this industry is talk about
Well,
attribution?
our peers outside of cyber, when you're under attack, you go, who did it? I want them in court. I want them to suffer. And you're like, all right, let's. I don't mean this condescendingly because everybody wants to strike back when they've been hurt. And it's really hard to realize, wait, my job is to heal from this damage, prevent shareholders from ever facing it again, minimize that damage and move on, not to get in the hack back retribution space or even legal space. It's hard for a business person who's never thought about cyber to suddenly go through all those stages of grief and then be like, okay, let's go just solve this problem. Like, I get it. But in cyber, we're like, oh God, we're never going to get the attribution and use it for anything meaningful. But it's amazing how many of these presentations come in when you're under attack from a consulting firm who says, oh, here's pictures of them and here's their report cards from high school. And I actually, in one breach, I had two companies come in and present about two different groups of people. I'm like, one of you is either wrong or lying, maybe both. Right. So, but maybe we're going to face in cyber what Brian saw in geospatial and Anthony saw happen over, I guess, 10 years. It was a pretty short span from using maps and having to call people to look up things on databases while you were in the field to it being what Anthony called ordinary. Maybe we're going to have that too.
Yeah. What's your take? Are Sam and I out of our minds on our take on intelligence?
You can say I'm out of my mind, but okay.
No, right? But I think, right, in the cyber world, in the geospatial world, right? Like if I remove the tradecraft side of things and the sciencey side of things, right? Like those take a little bit, more time and effort to truly understand. But I think everybody can wrap their brain around things being. I always joke about this, right? People like, what does our intelligence community do? Like, is that a secret map? Well, no. Like everyone drives down a street, and everyone knows there's homes. When you know who's in the home and that they're doing bad things, well, then that starts to become intelligence. But right, the fact that there's a home or a street or like that, none of that's a big secret. But I think people can wrap their brains around space and time and proximity, and like it just kind of makes sense. I think the cyber thing for people, it seems so complex, right? And people go, what do I need to know? How do I know it? What do I learn? Again, not something they teach you in school. That's actually a lie. Grant's taking a cybersecurity class this semester, which is cool. I wish we'd get rid of it. This will hit some people wrong.
By the way, on that, so he has a secret in.
Well, right, but this will hurt some people's feelings, right? But I would love to get rid of, trig. I mean, I'm sure you need it for something, right? But certain math classes and certain science classes, and let's teach finance, right? Let's teach financial literacy. Let's teach cybersecurity, right? Like there's some other things that I think would serve you better. I can't tell you, and again, we talked about my academic excellence. I can't remember anything that I learned in any of those classes ever, and at no point has it served me in my yard, on my roof, in an emergency. It's like, oh, what did I learn in chemistry class? I'm sure there's something you don't mix to kill yourself, but it's written on the it's written on the bottle, right? So, I wish we would do more of those, but I think cyber's starting to become more ordinary too, in the sense that people understand that there is a lot of power in it, that there is a lot of risk, that you have to take certain precautions to protect yourself and protect your things. And, people are learning that they have to, a lot of times through trial and error, right? Something bad happens, they go, I'll never do that again. But I think that's the one thing too, is we're all starting to become more aware that our information's out there. We want to protect our privacy. We want our stuff to be secure, right? Like all those things exist. I went through, issue with my mom a couple months ago where she had gotten hacked, and it was pretty crappy, right? But when people target other people, right? I told my mom, I'm like, look, man, that's why the bank pays hundreds of millions of dollars every year for all the tools and bells and whistles. Just hand over your problem to the bank when it doesn't make sense, right? And I think, again, we normal people, and I put myself in the normal people category, which I probably shouldn't. None of that stuff's taught, right? Like, where do you learn it if you're not learning it trial and error? Or if you're learning it off something you go read, and then are you reading things that are authoritative and correct? I don't know, right? That stuff's not being taught. So yes, I think it's going to become more
Right.
ordinary over longer periods of time. The more that people get hacked, I mean, when you talk about people stealing someone's life savings, right? Like that's the most aggressive and personal breach humanly possible, right? Where someone's involved and cleans your bank account out. But there's all these different things where people are seeing the examples now, and I think they want to understand, where does cyber fit in? How does it fit in? You know, how do I protect myself? How do I protect my kids? You know, it's crazy when you start talking about stuff that's on the dark web and all kinds of other places. There's so much stuff that's out there that's dangerous, right? And that can hurt and harm. I think people are starting to take cyber things more serious, even if they don't fully understand it.
That is crucial. We refer to cyber literacy. I don't know if I agree with you on the trig point, but I agree with you everything else. Well, I was talking to my brother about this because his son is actually going through, as I think you know, Simon, is going through a technical high school where they do a co-op, and it's very pragmatic, and he still has the option to go on to university. But part of me thinks some people know early what they want to do, and some people really don't. But there are some fields that really need trig and some that probably don't. But there's some underlying new set of core skills in things like critical thinking and things like cyber literacy. It's not just the 3 R's anymore, which weren't really R's, right? One's W, one's an A. But that we should be rethinking some of those things. It's just really hard to break tradition there. Yeah, but you know what? I think we also don't have the stop, drop, and roll. Even cyber experts, when they get hacked, sometimes don't know what to do, because it's always a thing that's at one remove, or it's a thing I do at work, or it's I never thought about it at my home, or it's happened to my kids or me or my husband or wife. It suddenly becomes very personal, and we haven't really done if this happens to you, what do you do?
Unfortunately.
Or you can just be a member of a security breach so many times from having a clearance that you don't care what's out there anymore, right? You're like, oh my God, you might get hacked. You're like, whatever. My stuff's been distributed so many times it doesn't matter anymore.
Someone asked me the other day, hey, I've set up a special site for you to send out your social security number. I'm like, everybody has it. Everybody has it. You know, it's in 50 breaches, but like I care about others, just not mine.
Sure.
Right.
But,
so we're approached an hour of content.
Yeah, we have. But Brian, this has been awesome. Thank you. My big takeaway is that we got to get you out more now because Grant's not around, and you need more martinis and beer. And
I gotta go find a martinis. Gotta go find a life now.
Thank you for joining us, Brian. It's been awesome, and all the best to Brian and Anthony and everybody else. It's great to have you.
Thanks guys. I appreciate your time.